multiple bangers, including my top 2 books of the year so far, a couple of disappointments, and a what did I just read? It's my June reading wrap up. Let's do it. I have a very large stack of books that I want to talk about. I had one of the best reading months in June, and a lot of that has to do with my handy dandy trusty TBR jar. June was the first month that I used the jar, and it definitely played a big role. I read some books that I would never have picked up, and I'm so glad that I did because some of them were really, really great. I mean, just banger after banger after banger most of the month. I would say of the 10 books that I read I'm here to talk about today, at least 8 were really good. That's pretty remarkable. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carly. I read and review historical fiction on multiple platforms. Here on BookTube, I like to do a little bit longer form content to talk about the books that I've read, plan to read, or books that I'm excited about that are publishing soon. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely subscribe and stay tuned. As always, all of the books that I talk about today are going to be linked below in the description. Let's jump into the book. I'm going to start with the what in the world did I just read? That is The Undoing of Violet Clayboard. This is a gothic novel set in the 1930s about a young girl who is caught in the snares of these well-to-do sisters. And what I mean by that is she's enthralled by one sister who comes to her boarding school and invites her back to their family home over the holidays because she doesn't have anywhere else to go. When she gets there, some stuff goes down and it is just bananas. There's also a later timeline when you meet the main character as an old woman, and she's talking about what happened back in the 30s that changed her life and the life of these sisters. There is murder, there is trauma, there is drama, and it's all got this kind of Downton Abbey style vibe. I don't know why, but it reminded me of Downton Abbey. It's got that late 30s vibe, and it's just, you know, set on this estate. There's hunting, and it's so good. It's so good, but it was bananas. I would say this is one of the most unhinged books that I've read all year. Before Dorothy by Hazel Gaynor was an instant favorite the second that I finished this. This is definitely going to be probably in my top 20, if I had to guess, maybe even top 10 of the year. I don't know why. I just loved this book so much. I'm not even a huge Wizard of Oz fan, but it's just so well done, and it's the origin story that you didn't know that you needed. This is the story of Auntie Em and how she came to live in Kansas with her husband Henry before Dorothy came to live with them. It is set in the early 30s, as well as a flashback to the 20s before she married Henry, and it is full of Dust Bowl stories, Great Depression stories, and it's just so rich and beautiful and hopeful, and I loved it. My first ever TBR jar pull, or my first ever TBR jar book. There you go. Antwanet Sister by, I'm gonna try and pronounce this correctly, Diana Giovinazzo. This was so good, you guys. This is the story of Maria, hold on. Yes. This is the little known story of Maria Carolina Charlotta, who is the sister of Marie Antoinette. Yes, the Marie Antoinette. Charlotta is a queen in her own right. She, like Marie Antoinette, were used by their mother to grow the Habsburg Empire. Marie Antoinette obviously married into the French royal family. Charlotte married into the Sicilian royal family and became queen of the two Sicilies, Naples and Sicily. And She was a force to be reckoned with. One of the things that I love so much about this book is that it incorporated that sister story and the bond between the two sisters, Charlotte and Marie. And you meet them as kids, and you kind of hear a little bit about their relationship before they were married, and then they correspond with each other throughout the book, and you get to read Marie Antoinette's letters to Charlotte throughout the book, so they're interspersed between the chapters, and it just added this richness to that relationship that I loved. It felt very intimate and relatable. I did love the difference between the way that Marie Antoinette was painted and the way that Queen Charlotte was painted. You know, she kind of, for all intents and purposes, became the primary ruler of her country. She married a young prince who had not really been raised to become a king. So he did not have that leadership that she had been raised to have in terms of how to run a household and a kingdom. I loved this. It was so rich. It was so well done. And I cannot wait to read more by this author. If you love monarchy fiction, you need to read this book. And best of all, it's based on a real woman who, again, was a force to be reckoned with. Another TBR jar pull and another banger, The Foundling by Stacey Halls. This is the story of one young woman who gets pregnant, gives her infant away the day that she is born to a foundling hospital. She has every intention to go back and claim her daughter when she has the money to do so. However, when she does, she discovers that her daughter was claimed already. Next thing you know, she's discovered who claimed her daughter and sets out to get her daughter back. This is the story of two women, one young girl, and two different extremes. We have the haves and the have-nots. It's set in mid-18th century London, so you know extreme poverty was rampant then, and her use of language and vernacular just leveled up the story. It's so good. Not a TBR jar pull, but a book that has been on my TBR for a long time, Circling the Sun by Paula McLean. I picked this up on a whim in June, and I really enjoyed it. I don't think that it is as good as The Paris Wife, her other book that I love, which is all about Ernest Hemingway's first wife. But I did love that this is based on a real woman, Beryl Markham, a record-setting aviator who grew up in Kenya. What I did enjoy about this book more than anything else wasn't Beryl's story. It was the setting. I loved how McLean incorporated Kenya and African culture into this book. It added so much to this story that otherwise I think could have fallen a little bit flat. I did feel like McLean relied a little bit too heavy on romance and relationships and less on the aviation. I feel like that was kind of was left way to the end of the book. And that's one of the more remarkable things about the character, not necessarily who she was in a relationship with. I felt like that could have been handled a little bit differently. However, it was enjoyable. I wouldn't say rush out and buy a copy, but if you see this on your library shelves or at a thrift store or something like that, and you're interested in books set in Kenya about white women who kind of battle the odds, felt like it was an accurate glimpse into colonial Kenya in the early 20s and 30s. The Personal Librarian by Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray was not my favorite book. And that like pains me to say, because I've read and enjoyed books by both of these authors this year. And I just don't know what it was about this one. It was so dense and boring. Sorry. This is based on the very real character, Belle DeCosta Green, who was the personal librarian of J.P. Morgan, who happened to pass as white, though she was black. So she had these really incredible accomplishments, things that other women had never done before. It's rich with art and literary history. It just was so dense is the only word that I keep coming up with. I felt like there was not enough action in this book. I don't know. And I love slow character studies, but this one it just, I don't know, it felt very formal at times, and I did not need the relationship in this book. I did not need the romance at all, and I think that that overshadowed the accomplishments of this character. A Magic Deep in Drowning, the brand new Hester Fox. This was also a disappointment for me, and that again pains me to say because Hester Fox is one of my favorite authors. This leaned a little too heavy on the fantasy element, and though I do sometimes enjoy historical fantasy, I did not care for this one. It is a reimagining or a retelling of The Little Mermaid set in 18th century Holland, and it was very heavy on the world building, and I didn't vibe with this book, y'all. I don't know. If you like The Little Mermaid, you might like it. Mother of Rome by Lauren J. Baer was a book that I gave away early this month or early last month, and decided before I give it away, I better read this book. And I'm so glad that I did. This was a mythological retelling about the mother of Romulus and Remus, the mythical twins, the founders of Rome. I thoroughly enjoyed this book and did not expect to do so. It's a intense revenge story. The book is all about Rhea Silvia, who is a princess whose father loses his kingdom to his brother, and she is going to become a Vestal Virgin. The night before she becomes a Vestal Virgin, however, she runs off to the woods and, with Mars, the god of war, and therefore gets pregnant, and ultimately has her sons Romulus and Remus. And I don't want to give anything away, but ultimately she is transformed into a wolf. And I loved the story. I thought it was so well done. It's mythical, it's fantastical. Is that a word? So it has a fantasy element, which worked for me, unlike A Magic Deep in Drowning. I don't know why one vibed and the other didn't, but Mother of Rome I really enjoyed. Now for my top 2 books of the month, and I honestly think of the year. Atmosphere. Your girl, Taylor Jenkins Reid, has outdone herself with this book. I personally think that it is her best, and I will basically hear no criticism of this book, even though you're entitled to your own opinions about it. This is a story of 2 female astronauts in the early 80s who fall in love. It is a love story at its heart. It is also a really cool story about space and NASA and what it meant to be a woman in a male-dominated field in the early 80s, as well as to be queer. And it's just so well done. The structure of this book is phenomenal. It felt like a roller coaster ride that you just did not want to get off, but it was a joy to read. It was a joy to experience. I sobbed hysterically at the end of this book, and I very rarely cry in a book. Last, and certainly not least, though Atmosphere was my favorite reading experience, I think this is the best book that I read in June. And I will never forget this book. I'm going to try not to cry talking about this book, even though I did not cry reading it. Betty is the story of a young girl named Betty who is of Cherokee heritage. She is part of a large family that's very poor. She has a very special and unique relationship with her father that just spoke to me, because I have a very similar relationship with my dad. And although there are a lot of trigger warnings, there's a lot of trauma, there is a lot of beauty in this book in the everyday. The descriptions that McDaniel uses to create the world in which Betty lives they're just so lush and stunning. She is a poet, and you get that vibe in this book. It is pure poetry. It's magic. What I loved most about this book is the mirror that it held for me. Being a child of poverty, I grew up very poor. There is a lot of magic and joy and sadness and sorrow in not having and making do with what you do have. And I think McDaniel captured that so beautifully in this book. It is absolutely stunning, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. For those of you who, when I first started, BookTube said, read this book, you were so right. I want to hear from you guys. What did you read in June? Have you read any of these books? What did you think? Let me know in the comments.